everybody. This is Lowell Thomas looking back at the year 1940, the second year of the greatest war of all time. We were not in it then, but the day was drawing near. Admiral Byrd was back in the Antarctic. The first old age security checks were mailed from Washington, and it was a memorable year for me because at that time I had the first television news program anywhere in the world. Not very many people had TV sets. Perhaps that was fortunate. We were hearing a lot about what the Soviet Union was up to. Germany's ally then. They were deciding to take over their neighbor next door, Finland. The Finns had other ideas, and the fighting was bloody.
The exodus of the North. 400,000 Finns abandoning their homes, their towns, their ancestral lands, departing from the territory ceded to Soviet Russia. A new mournful phenomenon of refugees. This is the area of Lake Ladoga, Viipuri, and the Karelian Isthmus, behind the Mannerheim line where the Finns made their desperate fight against the overwhelming Soviet thrust. This was a vital defense sector of Finland's boundary. They must give it up. An exodus. Viipuri, the city so stubbornly defended, now it goes under the red flag. The sea fortress of Hongo also given up. Nearly all of the people in the ceded areas prefer to leave their homes rather than live under the rule of the Soviets. Strategic Hongo dominating the Gulf of Finland, now under the red flag.
We were loaning Finland $20 million. But they couldn't stop those Russian hordes. And on March 12 came a sort of peace, costly for Finland. There were flickering hopes for world peace, just flickering. 500,000 British troops were in Europe. France was mobilized for war, waiting nervously behind that strange Maginot Line.
Through tank traps, the first civilian observation party to pay a war visit to the Maginot Line. Movietone producer Truman and New European officials of Movietone study frontline scenes, like that rotating pillbox. Producer Truman Talley is in Europe investigating war picture problems. The pillbox mechanism is below ground, subterranean world of war. They enter the buried fortress and have luncheon 320 feet underground. Truman Talley is decorated with a Maginot Line medal granted to visiting dignitaries. There's Movietone's European director, Russell Muth. Then, out in front, an advanced trench where the defense is machine guns. A rapid-fire marksman as he peppers an enemy position with bursts of fire. A village in no man's land, deserted, mined, explosive traps to blow an attacker, barbed wire, and a camouflage of cloth. The Movietone party pushes on to the last outpost in sight of the German line. They visit the artillery position, the French 75 firing a barrage. Flashes of cannon fire. Studying better ways to make newsreels of the war.
Underground forts couldn't stop Hitler. German bombs and torpedoes made Britain give up the naval base at Scapa Flow. Hitler and Mussolini were meeting and plotting at Brenner Pass. Prime Minister Chamberlain again prophesying peace. And 5 days later, Hitler struck.
German warplanes fly over the peaceful and unsuspecting capital of Denmark. They're dropping pamphlets, and these tell the astonished Danes that their country is to be seized by Nazi Germany. Immediately the invasion begins. German transports land troops. There is no resistance. These pictures have just been received by Clipper Plane, motion pictures as the German government permitted them to be released. We see the actual surrender of Copenhagen. The Danish commander on the right yields to the German commander. Norway, invaded, resists and gets Allied aid, but Denmark vows to overpowering force. Danish policemen at first disarmed, and then get their clubs and pistols back. They'll serve under German authority. The whole nation quietly submits. A German soldier directs traffic. This is how Nazi Germany took Denmark in the sudden, startling blow against northern neutrals. Copenhagen, vassal capital of a vassal nation. The German invading force is speeding to capture Oslo. The blow against Norway is launched. Warships loaded with troops, which they are to land. Soldiers wearing life belts, should the vessel be sunk in battle. the naval squadron drives through the waters of the Skagerrak for the surprise attack that transformed the war in Europe. These are the sea fighters that went into battle against the British. U-boats stalked stealthily to hurl their torpedoes in the tremendous sea fight of the Skagerrak. Ships of that fleet were sunk, and troop ships too. That ship, the cruiser Karlsruhe, was sunk, and so was the heavy cruiser Blücher, damaged by Norwegian coast guns and then struck a mine. And the report flashed that the big German battleship Gneisenau there was destroyed as the war guns boomed. The squadron steams on and into the fjord of Oslo. Mere hours before, Berlin demanded of Denmark and Norway that they yield to German control. Denmark did yield, but Norway refused. Norway would resist. Oslo, on a steep and rocky fjord, was strongly situated for defense, but defense was demoralized. There are reports of treachery, secret agent plotting, fifth column, and Trojan horse tactics. There was some fighting, and Nazi ships were sunk, but not enough resistance to prevent the Germans from landing and swiftly seizing Oslo. From the harbor, a Nazi seaplane flies on some mission of war. The Norwegian capital made to serve as a German air base. The unloading of troops and supplies illustrates with what thoroughness the surprise invasion was prepared. Heavy equipment, tanks, modern weapons, mechanized war to be waged with motorized speed. A new blitzkrieg to be launched by those battalions seizing a neutral nation. Headed by a regimental band, a goose-stepping parade. Simultaneously, other Norwegian ports are seized in much the same fashion. The sudden Nazi blow captures the important Norwegian harbors and air bases, putting the Allied counterattack under a grave handicap, giving the Nazi invaders a strategic advantage in the Norwegian war. Historic events are being shaped by these scenes in Oslo.
Norway surrendered, and the Nazi juggernaut kept rolling. Dive bombers blasting Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg, tanks and troops rolling across the borders, and the blitzkrieg was on.
Savage battle sweeps Belgium and into France. Belgium had prepared intensely for defense, and this army went into action. Nazi Germany landed the full power of its mechanized assault, but the Allies rushed prompt and powerful aid, leading his army, the Belgian soldier king. Through a nightmare of wreck and ruin, the war machinery of the Allies hurries to contest the invasion of the Nazi juggernaut. They hasten to avert disaster from the German lightning drive into northern France, which has isolated an Allied force of more than 500,000. The British Expeditionary Force hurls the last ounce of its energy into the cataclysmic struggle. 5 million refugees are driven forth to wander pitifully amid the wreck of their world, shocked with horror, marked with despair, helpless and in tears. Victims of the bombing, the devilish rain from the sky. Every hospital available is crowded with civilians who were bombed, some machine-gunned. Scenes that tell of the utter ruthlessness of war and invasion. Everywhere the tragic exodus by every road for hundreds of miles, weary, hungry. They're lucky when they find a relief camp to keep them from starving. Engulfing war sweeps hourly upon new thousands. It is an infinity of human misery, the stupendous tragedy of refugees that number 5 million.
The Nazis drove on to the Channel, cutting the Allied armies in two, and the British now had just one escape port, Dunkirk. The Nazi armored columns were within 20 miles of it. Fog held off the Nazi bombers, and 316,000 of the Allies escaped by warship, troopship, sailboat, rowboat, anything to get across the Channel. There was still some hope for Britain, but none for Neville Chamberlain. His peace at any price government had to go.
That the fate of Holland and Belgium
like that of Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Austria, will be decided by the victory of the British Empire and the French Republic.
A police car raiding Sir Oswald Mosley's British fascists, a prisoner, defiant. He gives the fascist salute as he's taken away to prison. Scotland Yard arrests a woman fascist in the middle there, and she gives a most defiant salute. Britain takes stern measures against the Fifth Column. Enemy aliens are rounded up, placed in camps. Britain was lenient during months of war, but now invasion threatens, and Nazi Fifth Column tactics were only too vivid in the invaded neutral nations. So all Germans are interned like this, aliens who might become part of a Fifth Column.
Hitler turned his armies toward France 700,000 strong, 2,500 tanks, 1,000 dive bombers. He crushed the French, and Mussolini decided this was the time to give France a stab in the back, and he did. Paris fell, France surrendered to Hitler. Said Churchill, "The Battle of Britain has begun."
In the casino at Vichy, the temporary capital, the French Parliament gathers to vote itself out of existence. Former Premier Herriot, as defeated France, changes its system of government. Laval, regarded as the dominant figure in the new regime. Former Premier Léon Blum, as France seals its surrender to Germany in these historic proceedings. The French Parliament votes to confirm the authoritarian government of Marshal Pétain, and thereby brings the Third Republic to an end. This is followed by the celebration of Bastille Day, somber celebration, led by Marshal Pétain, World War hero, General Weygand, who tried vainly to avert disaster. A wreath and a salute to former glory. The fall of the Bastille signalized the beginning of French political freedom, and now on Bastille Day, the Third Republic has fallen, the nation conquered by the invader. So the French 4th of July is an occasion for tears. There are historic meanings as we see the head of the new authoritarian regime salute regiments of the army that lost.
England prepared for invasion. Hitler's plan was to wipe out the Royal Air Force, control the air. Then his troops could easily get across the Channel. Goering's Luftwaffe attacked on August 10, bombing airfields and radar stations, and by September 1, few British fighters were able to fly. Just a few gallant airmen were fighting on as best they could. Then, one of Hitler's tactical blunders, he started bombing London, damage terrible, but it held up the invasion.
London on a day of bombing. Empty streets where only firemen are seen. The city's millions driven underground into shelters by the air raid alarm. Fire and explosion ravaged famous places known the world over. The havoc of ruthless war in one of the world's illustrious capitals. A bus hurled by the blast of an aerial torpedo which burst nearby there. A telltale sign of the fantastic orgy of ruin wrought by the rain of explosive day after day. No section spared, rich or poor, palace or workers' home. Thus the war in the air pours insensate destruction on a city so old and so great. Visiting the devastated areas, the king encourages his stricken people. While he is here, his own Buckingham Palace is bombed. Common fate uniting sovereign and subject. He inspects members of the air raid protection. Winston Churchill exhorts unbending resistance. Downing Street, where the Prime Minister resides, is bombed. He is the voice of British determination to stick it out, fight Nazi Germany to the bitter end. They're evacuated from devastated areas, tens of thousands, especially women and children, taken out of bomb-harried London, away to the country to safer places. Docks and shipping, London Harbor. The night is balefully aglow with flame. The blaze lights up the blackout, a beacon for other bombers. Night air raiding, most difficult of all to ward off. London tries an air barrage, a curtain of steel aloft, against bombers that fly in the dark. Britain denies that such as this can crack British morale. Do the Nazis hope to win this way? And does this presaged the long-expected invasion, Britain awaits grimly determined and coldly angered by this orgy of bombing and burning, and strikes back fiercely at Nazi cities and centers. The British capital begins its second month under the bombs and is not nearly destroyed. City life goes on. Destruction, though vivid, is only a small fraction. The vast metropolis has 1 million buildings, and at the present rate, it would take the Nazis years to destroy London. The smoldering ruins of Coventry after the night raid that set a new and ruthless standard for the bomb terror. In the industrial Midlands of England, this was an old medieval town, which had become a center of British aircraft industry. Coventry, its buildings, its homes, blotted out. The medieval cathedral, which was one of the venerable edifices of England. Telltale evidence of the kind of building the Nazi bombs so often strike and destroy. The body of the church, reduced to debris of ancient marble. Yet like a miracle, the spire still stands above the wreckage. The people return to clear the debris and resume the city's life despite the havoc. The bombers came over in waves. It was area bombing, not target bombing. 1,000 warplanes dropped 1 million pounds of bombs on this city of 165,000 people. The mass funeral of the victims. Death from the sky claimed 200 civilian lives. Interment in a common grave. A soldier throws flowers of farewell to mother. Thus do the terrorists of war inflict bitterest grief on hapless people. Coventry, another word for pitiless bombing. Building warplanes is a crucial part of Britain's answer to the ruthless bombing. This is one of Britain's aviation factories in busy operation, incessant work. Planes to fight the Nazi air raiders are Britain's vital need. Importing some from the United States, building others at home, like this. German air power strikes at factories. Coventry wiped out, but there are plants all over Britain where work goes on day and night, the work of building sky fleets. Shipbuilding, the construction of speedy freighters, an answer to German blows at British shipping routes. The Nazi power seeks by air bombing and submarine attack to blockade Britain, sinking the ships. Prime Minister Winston Churchill stated recently that this was a greater menace than the bombing of Britain. Losses have increased, and ships are needed to replace the ones destroyed. Britain orders freighters in the United States and speeds up the shipbuilding program at home, bringing munitions and food, the convoy, the supply line.
The RAF saved Britain. Never, said Churchill, have so many owed so much to so few. In America, we had a Lend-Lease agreement with Britain, and FDR was leading us into the war. Lindbergh and a few others were saying we should stay out.
There are still interests in this country and abroad who will do their utmost to draw us into war. Against these interests, we must be continuously on guard. But American opinion is now definitely and overwhelmingly against our involvement. If we desire to keep America out of war, we must take the lead in offering a plan for peace. That plan should be based upon the welfare of America. It should be backed by an impregnable system of defense. It should incorporate terms of mutual advantage, but it should not involve the internal affairs of Europe. They never were and never will be carried on according to our desires.
I hate war, now more than ever. I have one supreme determination: to do all that I can to keep war away from these shores for all time. No selfish interest, no personal ambition, yes, no political campaign can sway the majority will of our people of America to make America strong and to keep America free.
Roosevelt promised that American troops would not go overseas. Then on September 16 came conscription. We were shocked at news from Mexico, Trotsky murdered. Trotsky, who fled Russia to escape Stalin, his communist rival for power, but he couldn't flee far enough. And on the newsreel screen, movie stars were urging all aliens to register.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, hello, Charles.
Hello, Will.
Where are you off to in such a hurry?
I'm going to the post office.
I'm going to the post office, too.
And I know why you're going there.
To obey Uncle Sam's alien registration law.
Right. Now, let's see. Let's see your answer to question 7. Did you come as a passenger, seaman, or a stowaway?
Yes. And question 8, what did you say to that one?
Oh, that was easy. How long do you expect to remain in the United States? I wrote permanently.
No wonder, Charles. America has so much to offer that I imagine most aliens would want to live here always.
That's right. That's why they should show that they would make good citizens by obeying the law and registering now.
Let's tell the audience about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, we urge that everyone in the audience over 14 years of age that is not a citizen of the United States register immediately at your nearest post office.
America has admitted you with open arms. You owe it to America to register now, today, at once.
And thus show your loyalty to the United States.
The Great Depression was still with us, and there was bitter controversy over FDR's New Deal. But the big issue when the Republicans convened was, should any president, especially Roosevelt, be entitled to a third term?
New York delegation. Dewey led at first but slipped. Then a big break.
Wilkie, 75.
Wilkie gaining against Taft. And then came the end.
Pennsylvania cast 72 votes for Wendell Wilkie.
Governor Bricker of Ohio in the final formality.
Mr. Chairman, Ohio moves that the nomination of Wendell Wilkie be made unanimous. The chair is ready to put the vote. Are you in favor of making the nomination of Wendell Wilkie unanimous? Kindly say aye. Undivided, so it's a vote.
Wendell Wilkie, Republican candidate for the presidency of the United States.
It's just the beginning of the fight. A fight for the preservation of American ideals. A fight to bring about unity in America, for the restoration of our domestic economy, and the building of a great defense so that no dictator may strike. I thank the convention. I thank all of the American people.
With his wife, the Republican candidate holds his first press conference. In Philadelphia, Wendell Wilkie answers repertorial questions. What will he say when he receives the official notification of his nomination?
Don't create any rumors. I already accept.
If you should confer with President Roosevelt before the election, what would you say to him?
Well, of course, it depends on what he asks me. Times I've gone to the White House, he's done most of the talking.
How many had ever heard of Wilkie before that convention? Not many. Or his running mate, Senator McNary of Oregon. Among the Democrats, the question was, who would Roosevelt's vice president be? And he chose Henry Wallace.
That valiant American, Franklin Delano Roosevelt!
All precedent is broken. The third term tradition is smashed. Here's the vote. On the very first ballot, Farley 72, Garner 11, Tidings 9, Hull 5, and Franklin D. Roosevelt 946, after which they make it by acclamation for a third term.
today all private plans, all private lives have been in a sense repealed by an overriding public danger. In the face of that public danger, all those who can be of service to the Republic have no choice but to offer themselves for service in those capacities for which they may be fitted. I will, with God's help, continue to serve with the best of my ability and with the fullness of my strength.
Roosevelt received 54% of the vote, and John L. Lewis resigned, saying he'd quit as CIO's president if Roosevelt won again. The war went on and on. Finland conquered. Russia eyed the Balkans. Germany kept up a relentless bombing of London that was to last for 8 months. Meanwhile, the British did blast the Italian fleet, and that was 1940, a grim year as the World War spread. And this is Lowell Thomas saying, so long until tomorrow.
Against these interests, we must be continuously on guard. But American opinion is now definitely and overwhelmingly against our involvement. If we desire to keep America out of war, we must take the lead in offering a plan for peace. That plan should be based upon the welfare of America. It should be backed by an impregnable system of defense. It should incorporate terms of mutual advantage. But it should not involve the internal affairs of Europe. They never were and never will be carried on according to our desires.
And for the world, the event of the year. The Japanese sweeping down on our naval base at Hawaii, even as their emissaries were talking peace in Washington. Hello, everybody. This is Lowell Thomas, remembering the tragic year of 1941. At the beginning of the year, of course, we were not involved in the war. That was not to come until December 7th. The Depression was still on. We were hoping to stay out of the war. Nazi bombers were unloading their bombs on London every night, Hitler unleashing his submarines in the North Atlantic, his armies sweeping over all of Europe from Norway to the Mediterranean. Franklin Delano Roosevelt elected to that third term and telling America that we were in a state of emergency and that we were going to have to be the arsenal of democracy.
The big news story of this week is this. The world has been told that we as a united nation realize the danger that confronts us, and that to meet that danger, our democracy has gone into action. Let not dictators of Europe or Asia doubt our unanimity now. The process of the elimination of the European nations proceeded according to plan through 1939 and well into 1940, until the schedule was shot to pieces by the unbeatable defenders of Britain. The great task of this day, the deep duty that rests upon each and every one of us, is to move products from the assembly lines of our factories to the battle lines of democracy now. Whether you're in the armed services, whether you're a sailor or a stevedore, a machinist or a housewife, a farmer or a banker, a storekeeper or a manufacturer, to all of you, it will mean sacrifice in behalf of your country and your liberty. The determination of America must not and will not be obstructed by war profiteering. It must not be obstructed by unnecessary strikes of workers, by short-sighted management. In this historic crisis, Britain is blessed with a brilliant and great leader in Winston Churchill. They need tanks and guns and ammunition and supplies of all kinds. From America, they will get tanks and guns and ammunition and supplies of all kinds.
Roosevelt had already announced a Lend-Lease agreement with Great Britain, and now he sought and got congressional approval for this. He also announced that we had already released $500 million in war materials to Great Britain and Greece. Hitler had said that his U-boats would sink ships supplying Britain or Greece. The United States was retaliating, seizing all Axis ships that were tied up in American ports.
3 Italian ships anchored in Virginia waters. Seize them is the order given to the Coast Guard. So a speedy cutter goes to take over the fascist freighters. A party of Coast Guardsmen go aboard. The United States takes over a total of 69 Italian, German, and Danish vessels in American harbors. 4 Italian ships, and they've been sabotaged. 28 seized in various ports, and 20 had been damaged. The Coast Guardsmen, upon boarding, find that there had been systematic effort to cripple the vessels. There's a wrecked air pump. The reason given for the seizure is that the sabotaged ships might have impeded navigation in harbors. Wrecked control gear. In some of the ships, the damage will take a long time to repair. They cracked the thrust block of a propeller shaft. And as for engine room havoc, just look what they did to that boiler. The Italian crews are taken to stations of the Bureau of Immigration, and promptly proceedings under the immigration law are begun to deport them. A German ship. Only 2 Nazi vessels were in United States waters to be taken over. That one is vigilantly watched. A Coast Guard patrol on duty. At Ellis Island, the Danish cruise. Their country is under Nazi German domination, and no Danish vessels were sabotaged. These sailors are from 8 freighters lying there. Altogether, 39 Danish craft were taken over. And now the world wonders what is to be the next step in this drama of shipping.
Early in the year, in North Africa, the British went into action against the Italians. Italy had declared war on Britain as France fell. The British under Wavell recaptured territory lost to Italy, and they took 130,000 prisoners.
The Italian forces outfought and outflanked. Benghazi is surrendered to the advancing British. The capital of Cyrenaica, which is the eastern part of the Italian province of Libya. Its capture is the culmination of the brilliant campaign of the desert. At the municipal center of Benghazi, the victors unfurl the British flag. The proclamation of British occupation for the Libyans to read, if they know English. Proclamation by the new British governor of Cyrenaica, who now rules this area of the desert. General Sir Henry Maitland Wilson, lieutenant of victorious General Wavell, and he has played a prominent part in the series of battles that broke the fascist power. The military airport, which was bombed and blasted in preparation for the attack. Hangars shattered. Ground air squadrons wrecked. Motion pictures filmed by a staff cameraman of Movietone, showing havoc wrought by the RAF. Spoil of war, captured field artillery, abandoned equipment of battle, tanks. The harbor, a litter of wrecked ships. Benghazi was a #1 fascist war port. Now it lies a scene of ruin, like a symbol of broken empire. The Italians surrender at Amba Laji. British Empire forces driving into Ethiopia captured Addis Ababa, the capital. Italian military forces retired northward and made a stand at the mountain fortress of Amba Laji, and now they are forced to surrender. Full military honors are granted. The prisoners retain their arms. The British commander salutes them, and to the conquered enemy, British troops present arms. The Duke of Aosta, the Italian viceroy, cousin of the King of Italy, takes the salute of a guard of honor. He inspects the guard, traditional military ritual. The Duke of Aosta, surrendering, receives honors due to royalty. The old gentlemanly code of war observed in East Africa.
Wavell's forces eliminated the pro-German governments in Iraq and Syria, and he sent more men to Greece to help turn back the German tide. American forces occupied Greenland. Iceland invited us in as a protection against Hitler. And the British raided a German port way in the Arctic at Spitsbergen.
That northern island occupied by American naval forces is a logical development. First, Canada sent military units to Iceland to forestall possible seizure by Nazi Germany. The location is vitally important in the strategy of the North Atlantic. Now the United States supplements this Canadian action. Camps built for garrisons in this subarctic land where life is rigorous. Iceland was associated with Denmark, but proclaimed its complete independence when Nazi Germany seized Denmark. Then Iceland welcomed the protection of the Canadian forces. Here we see them building suitable shelters for the severe weather of the northern winter. The next development now occurs with the Icelandic government asking the United States to grant protection. And American naval forces have landed to supplement and eventually replace the Canadians. So the United States now assumes the task of standing guard over Iceland. Canadian, British, and Norwegian troops on a dramatic mission to the far north, sailing to Spitsbergen, halfway between Norway and the North Pole. There's no resistance as they land for a task of destruction. For Spitsbergen has abundant coal mines and is the site of a Nazi weather reporting station. There are 700 permanent inhabitants and 1,900 coal miners. No Germans on the island. The people are taken away to live in Great Britain until the war is over. Dynamite for the radio equipment and the mine buildings. The Nazis have been getting valuable weather information from Spitsbergen, and so the wireless tower is blasted and goes toppling down. Everything useful and workable is dynamited. Oil-soaked wood to burn the coal already mined and in the ground. Fire in the Arctic North. Hundreds of thousands of tons burn and the racing flame sweeps lofty mine structures. Coal deposits lie on the surface here and burn readily, so all is quickly on fire. The prevalence of coal dust makes the concussion of an explosion become visible. Resources here were about to be used by the Germans, but the British beat them to it. And now the immense fire will burn during the months of Arctic winter when Spitsbergen is in the grip of polar ice.
The British triumph seemed unimportant when the Nazis swept through Yugoslavia and on over Greece. And in a spectacular surprise, German paratroopers swarmed over the island of Crete, defeating the British there. And then came another surprise. June 23rd, Hitler turning on his ally Joseph Stalin. On a 1,700-mile front, Nazi columns driving into the Soviet Union. Hitler saying it was to save the world from Bolshevism. Actually, he was after Russian oil, food, and other resources, and he didn't trust Stalin. Hitler expected another blitzkrieg, and through the summer and the early fall, his panzers did crush the Russian resistance.
The Red Army, which is battling against a tremendous invasion. The latest pictures of the military machine that has been an enigma for years. How efficient is it really? How will it fare against the mechanized might of Nazi Germany? Stalin and Molotov review the forces that are now in supreme battle. The Soviets are assured the full support of Great Britain. Prime Minister Churchill, calling Hitler a bloodthirsty gutter snipe, give a pledge to help any Nazi enemy. Hid and burning, a supply ship loaded with war materials for the Nazi forces fighting the Red Army, a casualty of the war in the Baltic. The crew take to their lifeboats, then are captured and as prisoners are taken aboard the Soviet warship. Depth charge is something new for sinking a freighter exploding alongside. Scene of a ship sinking. It lists and rolls over. The stricken vessel turns keel up. Its hull caved in by the depth charges. The end comes with a plunge bow first to the bottom of the Baltic. A drama of warfare at sea. Another ship attacked. And a torpedo scores a direct hit. A second thundering missile. These are official Soviet pictures in action, illustrating Moscow reports of naval successes in the Baltic, heavy blows against Nazi supply ships.
Senator Harry Truman of Missouri was saying that we ought to help whichever side seemed to be losing and let them kill each other off, as many as possible. Great Britain was wasting little time in making Stalin an ally. The same was true of the United States. Meanwhile, Japan had sent an invasion force toward Indochina. The Japanese had long fought the Russians in Manchuria, and their ambassador was in Berlin just before Hitler turned on Stalin, and Japan let the world know that she wanted control of much of the Pacific. And on July 30, Japan was mobilized for total war, and her troops were landing in Indochina.
In the Asiatic area of peril, Great Britain makes ready for possible war, reinforcing Empire troops here at Singapore. Crossroads of Asia, all important in the strategy of the Far East. The commander-in-chief here is General Brooke Popham, who directs the defense of the Malay states and its jungle defense. In the Japanese-American crisis, Tokyo has a belligerent tone and masses troops to threaten Siam, so near to Malaya and Burma. And Prime Minister Churchill has said, if there's a Japanese-American clash, Britain will declare war on Japan within the hour. This as Britain prepares jungle defenses. Ready for battle in the equatorial forest. Getting the gun ready for a bombardment, and a ponderous cannon it is. General Douglas MacArthur, named American Commander-in-Chief in the Philippines. Grave crisis in the Far East, and the Philippine Army is combined with the armed forces of the United States. Japan takes strategic bases in French Indochina, and the United States mobilizes the Philippine Army for defense in case of war. An efficient army for fighting in a rugged jungle land. General MacArthur organized it, retiring from the United States Army to do so. Now he's back in service as American commander in the Philippines.
All attention now was on Europe. President Roosevelt saying we would do everything in our power to defeat Hitler. The next day, we sent warplanes to Russia, and the Royal Air Force began bombing Berlin every night. Roosevelt ordered our Navy to wipe the Germans out of the North Atlantic. Our factories were rallying for the national defense, and when workers at the Bendix aircraft plant refused to work, the Army moved in. Government advisor McCready called for labor's cooperation. On October 17, the militaristic Tojo became premier of Japan, demanding that the United States lift its embargo of oil and scrap iron to Japan and stop aiding China or else. On November 5, Ambassador Kurosu, envoy of the Mikado, embarked for Washington carrying an ultimatum.
Gentlemen, you all know how difficult my mission is, but I'll do all I can to make it a successful one for the sake of two countries, Japan and the United States.
Washington leaving the State Department. Secretary Hull takes Special Emissary Kurosu to confer with President Roosevelt. It's a headline news story, this mission to attempt a settlement. At the White House, Japan's new proposals are presented to the President, and then when they emerge from the conference, envoy Kurosu, questioned by newspapermen, preserves a diplomatic silence. Delicate negotiations with Japanese-American relations in so grave a crisis.
Japan's battle plan was drawn. She expected the United States to enter the European War, and then Japan would take over the Pacific. We knew these plans. We had broken the Japanese code, and we were preparing for combat in the Pacific. But on that quiet Sunday morning in Hawaii, we all remember what happened.
The fleet had been on maneuvers. Two task forces, after extensive operations at sea, steamed back to their Pearl Harbor base. This was during the final period of the phony Japanese peace negotiations, when staging a farce of talking peace, the Far Eastern double-crossers had their ships and planes on the way for the sneak punch. Their crime was well prepared as ships went on to Pearl Harbor. In the surprise assault, American warplanes were caught on the ground and bombed. Most of them were disabled. That crippled our air opposition to the Japs, and their planes were able to swarm over the harbor and bomb and torpedo the warships there. A bomb hit caused the Arizona to blow up. The attack was carried out by Jap torpedo planes together with dive bombers and horizontal bombers coming in waves. In a chance hit, a bomb went down a smokestack of the Arizona and exploded the forward magazine. With the stricken vessel, we see the battleships Tennessee and West Virginia hit and on fire. There were 8 battleships in the harbor. All were damaged by the bomb and torpedo attack. 5 battleships were damaged seriously enough to be useless for some time. Battleship Maryland on fire and the Oklahoma has capsized. And in the bomb and torpedo attack, high explosive hit the West Virginia. And the Tennessee seen in the background. The West Virginia has sunk in shallow water and rests on the bottom. The Maryland damaged and the capsized Oklahoma. Battleships were moored at docks in pairs, and the outer ones were torpedoed. The Nevada, attacked while steaming to leave harbor, was beached so as not to block the entrance. Destroyers, 3 were hit. 1 is back in action. 2 have been partly salvaged. 86 ships were at Pearl Harbor, and a large proportion of them were hit. The damaged aircraft is seen at Ford Island, where the motion picture camera surveys the wreckage of seaplanes. 80 Navy planes were destroyed. The crippling of air forces at Pearl Harbor was a major factor in the treacherous surprise plotted by the Far Eastern sneak punchers.
The devastation was far greater than we admitted at first. 3 battleships sunk, 4 damaged, 359 planes destroyed. But Japan made a mistake that proved fatal. She hit Pearl Harbor when our 4 great aircraft carriers were at sea. And this was going to be a contest in the air of carriers, not battleships. Meanwhile, Roosevelt had to sell a declaration of war to Congress, and that was easy.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. Indeed, 1 hour after Japanese air squadrons had commenced bombing in the American island of Oahu, the Japanese ambassador to the United States and his colleague delivered to our Secretary of State a formal reply to a recent American message. It will be recorded that the distance of Hawaii from Japan makes it obvious that the attack was deliberately planned many days or even weeks ago. During the intervening time, the Japanese government has deliberately sought to deceive the United States by false statements and expressions of hope for continued peace. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. Yesterday, the Japanese government also launched an attack against Malaya. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Hong Kong. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Guam. Last night, Japanese forces attacked the Philippine Islands. Last night, the Japanese attacked Wake Island. And this morning, the Japanese attacked Midway Island. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
We declared war against Japan, Hitler against us. London in flames, much of our Pacific fleet wrecked. But Russia had stopped the Germans 40 miles from Moscow, and Britain was bombing Berlin. It was the exciting year of 1941, and this is Lowell Thomas saying, so long until tomorrow.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. This is war. The American people want to know, and will be told, the general trend of how the war is going. But they do not wish to help the enemy any more than our fighting forces do. And they will pay little attention to the rumor mongers and poison peddlers in our midst. The report that we lost more than 1,000 airplanes at Pearl Harbor is as baseless as other weird rumors. The Japanese do not know just how many planes they destroyed that day, and I am not going to tell them. But I can say that to date, and including Pearl Harbor, we have destroyed considerably more Japanese planes than they have destroyed of ours. We know now that if we lose this war, it will be generations or even centuries before our conception of democracy can live again. And if we can lose this war, it will be only because we slow up our effort and waste our ammunition sniping at each other.
The year 1942, a year of war. Hello, everybody. This is Lowell Thomas. And it's difficult now to conceive, isn't it, of a moment when a threat of a foreign invasion could actually get such a strong grip on the American throat as it did in 42, or when our defenses were so weak that any militarized state in the world could even dream of seriously attempting it. But we did fear invasion. 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor and the Axis powers had overthrown Europe, Britain could be next, then the United States, perhaps. In the Philippines, we suffered that defeat at Bataan, the first time since Appomattox for an American army to actually taste defeat. And off Cape May, New Jersey, the Jacob Jones became the first United States warship ever to be torpedoed in our own coastal waters. In January, a Tokyo newspaper announced that Japan was ready for an invasion of North America. And in February, a California oil refinery was actually shelled by a Japanese submarine. We were not just fighting for an ideal, or for democracy, or for our allies. We were fighting for our own lives.
The American squadron has steamed secretly and swiftly for a surface assault against oceanic strongholds of the enemy in the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. Sea power plus air power here dealing a brilliant, damaging blow. A first installment of vengeance for Pearl Harbor. From the deck, our bombers take wing to smash strategic bases of the Japs. In skillfully coordinated action, our sky units go speeding to bomb, while the warship in with their powerful guns blazing away. Shells and bombs blast an enemy naval and air center. And other islands are attacked by other fleet units. A transport capsizing, 16 ships blasted, including a cruiser and an aircraft carrier. The shells set a big oil tank on fire. He spots a squadron of Japanese bombers speeding to attack the American ships. And now a stroke of anti-aircraft marksmanship. That enemy plane is hit and the pilot forced down. He tries to steer his disabled plane into the American aircraft carrier like a living bomb. Motion pictures of one of the dramatic episodes of the attack on the Gilbert and Marshall Islands as the plane fails to hit the carrier and falls into the sea. Admiral Halsey checks back over the operation, the first offensive stroke by the fleet in the Pacific. One of the world's great and historic liners is a fantasy of fire, with the skyline of New York for a background. And the circumstances of the disaster make it unique among dramatic spectacles. Wartime, and the Naval Auxiliary Lafayette was being made ready for service. She was formerly the Normandy, French Queen of the Seas, built at a cost of $60 million. 1,500 men were aboard, working and on guard. Busy scenes, the huge task of transforming the one-time super luxury liner for wartime duty. Then, the sudden sweep of fire. The ship burned hour after hour with raging spurts of flame. Mayor LaGuardia and Admiral Andrews of the 3rd Naval District, as the firemen with towering ladders do a dizzy job of firefighting and rescue. Hundreds of men were trapped below decks, and it's a miracle that only one life was lost, though more than 125 men were hurt and taken to hospitals. Immediately, there were swift, angry suspicions of sabotage, for you could think of few larger objectives for the undercover criminal work of the saboteur than this magnificent titan of the seas. But the Navy says the indications point to an accidental cause. The great ship listing, threatening to capsize, turn over on one side because of the huge masses of water poured in to quench the flame. They cut a hole in the side for counter-flooding to equalize the water. But the Lafayette, formerly the Normandy, finally did turn on its side at night after listing like this. 83,423 tons of ship turned turtle. The Navy insists that the burned and capsized ship can be salvaged, can be raised up and righted, floated and put into service again. If so, it will be the greatest salvage job ever accomplished.
America came back from these disasters and defeats with a vengeance and in a hurry. Every day the news was full of tales of heroism, grim struggle, last-ditch stands, noble sacrifice. As the Philippine defense crumbled, President Roosevelt ordered MacArthur from that desperate battle so that he might head all of the Allied forces in the Pacific, and he escaped, as you know, by submarine. And he said, "I shall return." Congress passed a record-breaking Army appropriations bill. We had now spent $205 billion on the war, more than we had for everything else between George Washington's first term and Franklin Roosevelt's second. We see after months of fighting, and our Navy proved superior to the Japanese fleet in the Coral Sea. And our Australian allies, they took on new hope, though the enemy was right at their doorstep.
A swift episode of battle in the Pacific. Japanese planes fought off by American guns. The sky is splashed with smoke bursts of anti-aircraft fire, and enemy bombs from above explode in the water. A Jap torpedo plane flies low to the attack and comes to a dramatic end. The Japanese losses were disastrous. 3 aircraft carriers listed as sunk, another heavily damaged. Scores of others, from giant battleships to troop transports, blasted by American bombs. One of the greatest blows of devastation ever struck in ocean warfare. And among the enemy losses in the Midway battle was the cruiser that you see burning there. A close look at that enemy cruiser. Official Navy pictures record the frightful destruction wrought by American bombs. Of the powerful Mogami class, the Jap warship is twisted wreckage, torpedoes blown over the side. From Port Moresby in New Guinea, they go to bomb the Japs at Leh on the opposite shore of that great island. An example of the American air raids that are hitting the enemy hard. This one ends with a thriller of war. Generals Royce and Scanlon wait for the return of the planes. And look, no wheels for landing. Enemy bullets shot away the undercarriage hydraulic system, and the wheels can't be brought down. Seems like a certain crash, but the pilot brings the bomber in, sliding on the undersurface of the fuselage. The friction on the runway is so intense that it grinds up a cloud of dust. And from that damaged bomber, there might well have been an escape by parachute, but the pilot stuck to his ship, Lieutenant Colonel Devine. General Scanlon congratulates Colonel Devine for following the aviation motto about bringing home the plane.
There he is. There's the hero of Bataan. Every inch the man Australians had pictured him to be. Strong, dynamic, vigorous. A fitting leader for Anzac troops and their American comrades in arms. I know the Australian soldier well from the last war and admire him greatly, the General told Pressman. I shall do my best. I shall keep the soldier's faith. MacArthur's coming after weeks in which 90% of the news had been printed in blue ink acts like a tonic not only in Australia but in America and Britain too. It is true that MacArthur is but one human being. It is equally true that he alone cannot win this Pacific War. But just the same, his appointment as Supreme Commander-in-Chief is mighty bad news in Japan. MacArthur has come, he has seen, he has conquered. Before him is a vast job of reconquest, one in which he will have the united backing of every man, woman, and child on this menaced continent.
It was a year of desperate battles in one theater of war after another. Bataan, Guadalcanal, Tobruk, Stalingrad, all became names of places where the Axis powers drove somebody's back to the wall. And then they learned what it was like to fight somebody whose back was at the wall.
The salvage of damaged equipment is an important factor in the Battle of the Desert. A tank salvaged under fire. Battle action for the British troops, and as the shells whiz over, duck. American tank units are fighting in the desert conflict, knocking out Nazi tanks. Ours have been hit but little damaged in fighting like this. Air power plays a great part in the Battle of Egypt. South African pilots like these have distinguished themselves, as have American Army air units, whirling into action on the desert. These are the latest pictures from the North African War, showing how United Nations airmen have been striking the Nazis, raiding the enemy with bombs. After having been defeated in Libya, the British retreated into Egypt and made a stand, defending Alexandria, and they checked German Field Marshal Rommel in bitter and successful fighting, air action playing a dominant part. Convoy bound for Malta in a desperate battle. Fighting their way from Gibraltar, the escort warships hurl depth charges against enemy submarines. Most perilous part of the Mediterranean, and there's incessant anti-aircraft fire. The heavens are seared with shell bursts. In all of this war, there's been no more desperate clash of bomb versus gun. The spectacular climax of war drama comes as an Italian torpedo plane flies low over a British warship. You can see the torpedo it carries. shot down and seen at close range, on fire, sinking in the sea. The end of an enemy warplane.
At home, we had a united front. All Americans were faced with shortages, rations, a point system that baffled shopper and greengrocer alike. In the movies, newspapers, radio, newsreels, there was no doubt about it. We were in a war.
This mighty display of military power is a climax to a mission of war planning. The Army shows its strength in a spectacular display. Prime Minister Winston Churchill sees the myriad hosts of American manpower on parade. Also American machine power. With American Chief of Staff Jim Marshall, he's at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and there visits the paratroops. It's a big day for the Prime Minister and the inevitable Churchill cigar. A sky thrill is on schedule. With Secretary of War Stimson, he's to see a host of paratroops in mass action. A portable radio telephone enables him to hear the command given high above, the command to jump, bail out. It's one of the greatest parachute demonstrations ever staged, and it has a pointed meaning. In any landing on a Nazi-controlled coast to establish a second front, parachute operations would play an important part. This kind of landing. This shows how masses of troops can be sent floating to Earth in a surprise, or at some point dominated by their own air power. They descend so thickly they almost bump into each other. Churchill has been conferring with President Roosevelt, and a second front has been prominent in their discussions, to which this is an apt sequel. Landing in the trees. Yes, the Prime Minister sees them come down into what may be convenient cover. This is a last impression of America for Winston Churchill to take back to Britain. It has a vivid war meaning. So what does he think of it all?
We were enormously impressed with what we have seen this morning of the thoroughness and precision with which the whole formation of a great wartime army of the United States is proceeding. The parachute display was the most remarkable I've ever seen.
Digging for sabotage material buried by Nazi agents landed from a U-boat on the coast of Florida, and the boxes are found by the FBI. 4 saboteurs came ashore here, while 4 others were secretly landed on Long Island. They now face trial by a military commission on charges that carry the death penalty. The boxes contain material investigated by the FBI. With an X-ray apparatus, he looks inside some blocks of wood and finds that hidden in them are sabotage devices. These, when taken out, are seen to be detonators for touching off high explosives, of which the 4 boxes contained a large quantity, TNT, for sabotage explosions. In the boxes were also found pens and pencils. They'll write, but they are really incendiary devices the saboteurs were taught to use for setting sabotage fires, in the way that this incendiary pencil demonstration shows. Our shores indicates FBI Chief J. Edgar Hoover need vigilant guard and public vigilance.
Recent landing of saboteurs from Nazi submarines sounds a new alert for all Americans. We ask every citizen to immediately report any information regarding espionage, sabotage, or un-American activities to the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Rationing of home heating oil has become necessary in 30 states and the District of Columbia because of the critical transportation shortage arising from diversion of tankers to our military needs. Rationing will start about October 15th. Generally speaking, each household using oil for heat will get about 25% less oil than last year.
Here's what to do about it. Put storm windows in for the winter. They are one way to save heat and conserve fuel. Put insulation pads on walls and keep the cold out. And use weather strips for doors and windows. Chairs near radiators impede heat circulation, as do curtains. Taking out the oil burner. If your furnace was converted from coal to oil, change back to coal, putting in a grate. because of the fuel oil shortage. The right way to stoke a furnace: push the live coals to one side and shovel in the fresh coal at the other side. Live coals ignite the gases from fresh coal. More heat. Then turn the thermostat down to 60 degrees at night. She helps to win the war by saving fuel and will sleep the better for it. Children do their share in the scrap metal campaign. Scenes of the nationwide drive to relieve the shortage of metals for armaments. All to defeat the Axis enemy. One way for civilians to join in the fight for victory. That plane is flown to the junk heap. A Philadelphia policeman and amateur flyer is joining the Marines, so he hands over his 10-year-old aircraft. A lot more metal for the myriad tons of scrap that American citizens are piling up to win the war. On their way to the armament factories to be made into weapons for American fighting men, go endless carloads. At San Diego, California, President Roosevelt observes the building of giant consolidated bombers, one of the high spots of his 8,754-mile tour of this nation's war plants and bases. He sees the American air power program moving fast. At Crockett Station, California, a Jap sub. An enemy loss is this midget undersea craft, brought to the United States and now inspected by the President. At the Ford Warplane Building Plant, Willow Run, Michigan, the President, with personal visits, gathers a huge amount of first-hand information about our war production. Newsmen far and wide knew about this secret tour, but a voluntary censorship kept it concealed. Now we have the motion pictures, like the President there with Henry Ford. At the Chrysler Tank Arsenal, Detroit, occurs that bit of headline drama. A ponderous speeding tank roars right up to the presidential automobile. Looks as if it would smash into the car, but it makes a quick stop a few feet away.
In Europe, Hitler was occupying all of France, and he hoped to capture the French fleet. But it was scuttled by its crews, bombed by British airmen, and in Yugoslavia, the Chetniks and partisans were fighting back, and the British were smashing the Nazis from the air, the Nazis retaliating, often against quiet, ancient, and particularly beautiful English towns and cities. But our own war effort was beginning to show. We were soon tasting more victories in the Pacific, and we were proving to Hitler and to ourselves that we could even attack Fortress Europe.
In a warplane over Dieppe, a camera view of anti-aircraft fire. The plane speeding past bursts of shells. What a war pilot sees when he's amid the perils of anti-aircraft fire. The streak of tracer bullets aimed at the camera plane. All with the and covered by smoke streams comes battle their way onto the beaches of the town, where England is so near to France. The Germans put up a powerful resistance, but the commandos fight their way into the town of Dieppe. This coordinated air raid and land action was designed to work havoc among the Nazis and their defense work, and to gain information and tactical knowledge to be used in planning a full second invasion. Heavy destruction wrought and invasion lessons gained. Now air power covers the return home. The ships move with clockwork precision for the return of the commandos. Nazi propaganda represents the operation as an invasion attempt that is defeated, but we see the ships in preconcerted action to take away the commandos and American Rangers, their task having been completed, and they are a cheerful bunch returning, full of vivid impressions of the battle they went through and the success they accomplished. The wounded are brought ashore. The losses have been heavy, and Britain's problem is to reckon to what extent the super raid was worth the price. That is left for time to tell. Heavy losses were inflicted on the Nazis too, and the commando wounded are cheered by that knowledge. They know they struck a damaging blow. Planes come in from air battle, and when you see a plane marked with a star, then it's American. Our skycraft played a great part in the mighty sky conflict. The American Rangers return, through the mill and out of it, eager to fight again. That will win this war.
Later in the year, it was obvious the Axis was overextended, and Japan and the Pacific had lost the advantage of Pearl Harbor. Italy had lost Italy. But nowhere was the overextension more apparent than the assault of Germany on Russia. Hitler was discovering what Napoleon had found out long ago.
Soviet Foreign Commissar Molotov comes to greet a distinguished visitor who arrives in Moscow by plane. And who do we see emerging but British Prime Minister Churchill? With American Representative Averell Harriman, Churchill comes to Russia to discuss war policies. He presents British views about a second front which is demanded by the Russians. Then there's a military parade, an example of the soldiers that have fought so desperately. And Winston Churchill speaks a war pledge conveyed to the Russians thus.
Whatever our suffering, whatever our toils, we will continue hand in hand like comrades and brothers until every vestige of the Nazi regime has been beaten into the ground, until the memory only of it remains as an example and a warning for future times.
On their way to the Kremlin to discuss greater collaboration for the defeat of Nazi Germany, negotiations of world importance by Churchill and Harriman with Stalin. Churchill discovers that Russians find it hard to comprehend the difficulties of a second front, but he and Stalin reach an understanding. Stalingrad on the Volga in flames, but the Soviet defense holds fast with methods of fighting that we see here. This defense of the industrial city is the key to the new great offensive operation that the Red Army has launched to encircle the German army in front of Stalingrad. The Nazi plight traces back to the unbreakable resistance and incessant counterattacks in Stalingrad. The ground troops fighting their way are under air attack. Nazi planes fly to bomb. Targets for the marksmen who direct the anti-aircraft batteries, and these blaze away. These first motion pictures from inside of Stalingrad are film history of the heroic city that burns but will not yield. A defense that in the future may prove to have been the turning point of the war in Russia.
And so the tide of battle was turning. Hitler's armies were stopped, the Luftwaffe outfought. We were not to be overrun by the Japanese again. The war was far from over, but on land, on sea, and in the air, the Allied forces were showing their power. This is Lowell Thomas, remembering with you the long, grim year of 1942, and saying, so long until tomorrow.
This is a last impression of America for Winston Churchill to take back to Britain. It has a vivid war meaning. So what does he think of it all?
We were enormously impressed with what we have seen this morning of the thoroughness and precision with which the whole formation of a great wartime army of the United States is proceeding. The parachute display was the most remarkable I've ever seen.
Hello, everybody. This is Lowell Thomas, joining you in looking back at the year 1943. World War II rolling on, the democracies winning. At Guadalcanal, stopping the Japanese, recapturing the island. Savage jungle warfare, our Marines and one of the Corps' great victories. And in Europe, good news for a change from the Eastern Front. Hitler's armies facing the fierce Russian winter, plus masses of Russian troops, especially at Stalingrad. Our confidence growing, as President Franklin Roosevelt's State of the Union message indicated.
Hitler and Mussolini, they will understand now the enormity of their miscalculation, that the Nazis would always have the advantage of superior air power, as they did when they bombed Warsaw and Rotterdam and London and Coventry. That superiority has gone forever. Yes. We believe that the Nazis and the fascists have asked for it, and they're going to get it. I do not prophesy when this war will end, but I do believe that this year of 1943 will give to the United Nations a very substantial advance along the roads that lead to Berlin and Rome and Tokyo.
On January 27, our B-17s began daylight bombing of Germany, with the RAF stepping up their night assaults, massive blockbuster bombs on Germany and Italy. Air power slowed Axis war production and kept the Germans on the defensive. The tide of battle turning as the year went on, and we saw how great were the German losses on the Eastern Front.
Caucasus oil wells are flaming as the Nazi invaders arrive. The enemy seizes the lesser of the Soviet oil fields, only to find that the Russians have applied the policy of the scorched earth. River area, the Nazis in the drive to Stalingrad. Their offensive smashes on. German films worn and marked by war, pictures of what they expected to be a mighty victory. In the inferno of battle, the flamethrowers advance. Helped by the hurling of hand grenades, troops push on with shooting streams of fire. It's like a fantasy out of a volcanic underworld. Nazis drive to their supreme objective, Stalingrad, which is assailed by their dive bombers. Stalingrad makes a desperate defense against this attack. Stalingrad devastated and aflame holds out, though the Germans push into the city and capture part of it. They stay there as the Soviet army, to trap them, launches a counteroffensive. These are Soviet motion pictures showing the drive that crushed Nazi forces at the rear of the Germans in Stalingrad and left these isolated, doomed to destruction. The relentless attack on the German 6th Army trapped in a section of the city. The assault is resisted desperately by the encircled enemy, but the end is inevitable. Surrender! German command capitulates, and high officers of the Nazi army are among the prisoners. One of them is General von Daniel. 24 German generals in all surrender, including Lieutenant General Sohm. It's a bitter day for the pride of Prussian militarists. Romanian General Dumitriu gives up with his satellite Romanian troops. German Lieutenant General Schlemer, and following him, Major General von Draber. General Field Marshal von Paulus, who commanded the Nazi forces in Stalingrad. Surrendering his whole 6th Army, he is the highest officer captured in the war thus far. Now he is brought to Russian military headquarters for questioning by a staff officer of the Soviet Army at Stalingrad. This is a scene of historic drama, the capture of Nazi Field Marshal von Paulus. German 6th Army, all that remains of the formidable force that, flushed with victory, stormed its way to Stalingrad. Now a horde of prisoners trudging along, stumbling along, in the Russian cold, hardly able to drag their ragged feet. Instead of capturing Stalingrad, they wind their way an interminable line of captives through Stalingrad's streets. Their defeat was the critical factor in the moves of war that turned the Nazi bid for decisive victory in southern Russia into a staggering disaster. Grim scenes along the line of German retreat.
The Russians were on the offensive, as were the Americans and British. In late 42, the Allied forces under Eisenhower were invading North Africa. Mark Clark, remember, secretly landing by submarine, plotting with the French. Admiral Darlan, the French commander at Vichy, ordering no resistance to our landings. Well, Hitler ordered all of France occupied, but we now had our foothold in Africa, and the French Navy scuttled their fleet to help us. The British under Montgomery and the Americans under Patton were blasting the Africa Corps. Rommel was beaten at Kasserine Pass, and we soon took Bizerta and Tunis and all of North Africa, where the Germans surrendered. And in July, we invaded Sicily. Again, Patton's tanks leading the assault. Victory costly and swift. Now we were poised for Italy, for a second front against the Axis.
The beginning of the invasion of Italy. The British 8th Army on its way to land on the toe of the boot, under protection of a powerful bombardment. When this landing was made, Italy in fact had already surrendered secretly, and the invasion of the toe of the boot encountered only minor opposition from the Germans. The thing needed of the British 8th Army here was speed. Swift advances to cooperate with another Allied army scheduled to land further north. The overthrow of Mussolini and fascism is acclaimed in Rome. Popular jubilation, and the demand is shouted for Italy to get out of Nazi Germany's war. A fascist emblem, and somebody nearly gets hit. Italy surrenders, and Italians are ordered to fight against the Nazis, ordered by Marshal Badoglio. Now British motorized equipment and American troops are in the outskirts of Naples. They are welcomed by the people who have suffered bitterly from the oppression of the Nazis. The Allied advance has forced the Germans to evacuate, before which they inflicted brutal and wanton destruction. Drawing water from a well, for the Nazis have blown up the water supply of Naples, the great aqueducts. The rolling advance of the motorized equipment becomes a carnival parade, a Neapolitan ovation. Some have guns. People fought against the Nazis, whose atrocities in Naples have been bitterly denounced in the Italian declaration of war against Germany. And the Allies are greeted as saviors. It's like an extra happy feast day. And in this once fair city of sunny Italy, the people always were fond of fiestas. Under Nazi rule, the people had lived in terror and oppression, from which they now are free. The Neapolitan populace has always been excitable, and this is a great chance to let off steam, a carnival of Naples. extending across the Italian peninsula, equipment and men moving north. General Mark Clark, a vigorous soldier of 47, is in the thick of the action. He directs his Fifth Army in speedy moves of battle. American Army nurses and a baby born in a battle-torn town. They help a life begin in the turmoil of war which cut short so many a life. In the fighting zone, the mother was wounded by shrapnel. The Americans care for her and her newborn child.
We actually concluded a secret armistice with Italy's Badoglio government, Mussolini in prison. But daring German paratroopers rescued him. The invasion of Italy had been agreed upon by Great Britain and the U.S. in May, a conference in Washington codenamed Trident. They also agreed on another front in France, invasion to be a year later. Winston Churchill here for the conference, addressing Congress.
It is the duty of those who are charged with the direction of the war to overcome at the earliest moment the military, geographical, and political difficulties and begin the process so necessary and desirable of laying the cities and other munition centers of Japan in ashes, for in ashes they must surely lie before peace comes back to the world. And here let me say, let no one suggest that we British, have not at least as great an interest as the United States in the unflinching and relentless waging of war against Japan. And I am here to tell you that we will wage that war side by side with you in accordance with the best strategic employment of our forces, while there is breath in our bodies and while blood flows in our veins. The African war is over. Mussolini's African empire and Corporal Hitler's strategy are alike exploding. One continent at least has been cleansed and purged forever from fascist or Nazi tyranny. The proud German army has by its sudden collapse, its sudden crumpling and breaking up, unexpected to all of us, the proud German army has once again proved the truth of the saying, the Hun is always either at your throat or your feet. By singleness of purpose, by steadfastness of conduct, by tenacity and endurance, such as we have so far displayed, by these and only by these can we discharge our duty to the future of the world and to the destiny of man.
By now, we were clearing the Pacific of Japanese invaders. The Aleutian island of Attu was recaptured. By mid-43, our Navy had recovered from the early Japanese onslaught, and we were gaining the upper hand nearly everywhere. And now newsreel audiences could actually see film of a daring raid on Tokyo that we had kept secret just to keep the Japanese guessing.
The Navy carrier Hornet with Army bombers on its deck, what President Roosevelt called Shangri-La. The sea is heavy, a destroyer of the task force that consists of 2 carriers with cruisers and destroyers. From the heaving deck, the bomber takeoffs will be made by Army pilots who have never flown from a carrier before. Japanese patrol boat spots the task force prematurely and is sunk. Shells hit, but the boat can't have flashed wireless warnings to Tokyo. An American lifeboat picks up Jap survivors. The brutal enemy executed some of our flyers that they captured, but we saved the lives of the Japs. On the carrier, Jimmy Doolittle and his flyers must take off sooner than they had planned. The Hornet's commander, Captain Mitcher, was once decorated by Japan, and now he gives the medal to be returned to the Japs, returned on a bomb. The flyers expected to take off when 400 miles from the enemy coast, but because of the premature discovery, they must go on the bombing flight much sooner. Jimmy Doolittle has asked the task force commander, Admiral Halsey, to go in closer for an hour and a half more, and the Admiral says okay. And now the signal is flashed for the takeoffs. The flight to Tokyo. They will arrive over Tokyo shortly after midday. Dangerous time for bombing. And flying on to China, they will get there at night. Darkness for landing, and that timing is the toughest. But bravely they go. On to Tokyo. The Jap capital where resistance was ineffective. The defense system, as they here practice it, was disorganized and in a panic. The planes attacked military targets. Their commander instructed them not to blast the Jap Imperial Palace. That's scrupulous about not bombing non-military targets. In China, after bailing out by parachute or making crash landings in darkness and storm, Madam Chiang Kai-shek presents decorations. 2 planes came down in Jap-controlled China, crew members captured, several executed by the brutal Japs, killed on charges of bombing non-military targets, the thing they were so careful to avoid. They're not yet aware of what they have to avenge.
When those newsreel pictures were released, the aircraft carrier Hornets had already been sunk by the Japanese, blasted by torpedoes at Guadalcanal in October of '42, but we didn't see the pictures until 1943.
Planes take off from the deck of the aircraft carrier Hornet, the Battle of Santa Cruz. The fighter squadrons and anti-aircraft guns of the American Task Force shot down 156 Jap warplanes in this engagement. Japanese bombers and torpedo planes attack the Hornet, and tracer bullets seek their targets. Japs are shot down, but some get through the storm of gunfire. Jap driven away, but a determined attack by many planes is difficult to beat off. An American ship goes to the aid of the Hornet, which with a bucket brigade is fighting fire. Water dipped from the sea. The carrier has been damaged, the regular firefighting system put out of action, and the bucket brigade does heroic work and extinguishes the fire. The Hornet is taken in tow and seems on its way to safety. Then there's another bombing attack. Shells from the damaged carrier destroy enemy planes, but the Japs press on through the fire. From the perilous expanse of sky, bombs rain down, and some are near misses. Zero banks up and is riddled, but a bomb hits the deck. The bomb smashed through the deck, and the gallant Hornet is mortally stricken. On fire, gutted by explosions. An American warship approaches to take off the crew of the carrier, which now is listing badly. A destroyer transfers the survivors, many of them wounded, transfers them to a cruiser. Nearly all of the 2,900 men of the crew have been saved. The Japs never did sink the Hornet. American warships sent the stubborn carrier to the bottom with torpedoes and shell fire. The Hornet in the Battle of Santa Cruz and Midway destroyed a giant Jap carrier, bombed and torpedoed others, blasted battleships, and sank cruisers.
The Hornet, the Enterprise, the Lexington, and their flyers by now had stopped the superior Japanese naval forces. And in the Southern Pacific, we were moving to recapture the Philippines. We were cutting the Japanese lines of communications and establishing bases for our planes. One giant step by way of New Guinea, where Japanese troops had actually come within 32 miles of the Allied base at Port Moresby.
The mass paratroop assault is one of the most spectacular of military operations. These Australian soldiers of the sky are equipped with machine guns, naturally, But there's field artillery too. Cannon to be sent down in sections by parachute. General MacArthur, commander of the New Guinea campaign, directs the paratroop thrust through the sky against the Japs. And now the motors are roaring. Inside the paratroop transports, aerial soldiers are ready for the jump. Some so much at ease that they sleep until their turn comes to fix parachutes for the leap into space. They are nearing the point selected for the mass descent. And now the plane disgorges a stream of paratroopers. In the wiping out of Japanese positions on the North New Guinea coast, parachute invasions have played a decisive part. And this mighty swarming of aerial invaders is the greatest of the campaign. One paratrooper has something go wrong with his chute, and he comes down faster, and he hits the ground harder than he figured he would. The mass landing of the aerial army.
In mid-Pacific, our policy now is island hopping, seizing key bases, bypassing others. Admiral Nimitz seizing the Gilbert Islands, the first major objective, right on the equator, 2,500 miles from Pearl Harbor. Here we started those amphibious landings of Marines and Navy men that would carry us right to Japan's door. Naval guns and planes would soften the enemy defenses, and the Marines would storm ashore. Major island of a group of 5, Betio, Tarawa, an island name long to remember. The 2nd Marine Division trained for 8 months in New Zealand for this. 1 a.m. November 20, they were aroused for breakfast of steak and eggs. Then into Amtraks, amphibious tractors to carry them ashore, or in the case of the island of Betio, part way. They would wade through shallow water to the beach. Marine and naval leaders disagreed over the invasion techniques, the use of manpower. Planned aerial bombardment was less than ordered, radio communications inadequate. Battleships and cruisers poured shells onto Betio, some expecting to find all dead on the island. The defenders were much alive, resistance fierce. Amtraks in the first wave couldn't get past the coral reef. The Navy had miscalculated the water's depth. More than half of the Marines had to wade through 800 yards of water. Many drowned, others gunned down. In one battalion, only 400 reached the beach. The Japanese fire murderous. They had big British guns brought from Singapore, well-concealed machine guns. For 76 hours that battle raged. There were 3,000 Japanese soldiers and 1,800 of their laborers defending the island. All died, excepting 147 prisoners. On nearby Abimama Island, all 25 defenders committed suicide. More than 1,000 of our Marines lost their lives at Tarawa, 2,300 wounded. We learned the need for better planning, more powerful bombardment, more Amtraks and flamethrowers. Tarawa led to many changes as we continued island hopping on our way to Tokyo. 6,000 bodies had proven many points. We lost the carrier Liscum Bay at Tarawa, 644 dead, victims of a Japanese submarine. But we were carrying the war to the enemy, landing at key points, and we were plotting total victory. Bombs were raining on Germany, and Roosevelt and Churchill were meeting in Cairo. They're deciding on Eisenhower to be the commander-in-chief for the invasion of France. And then they joined Stalin in Tehran.
Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek with President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill. And Madame Chiang is there, taking part in the Cairo conference after a trip by air all the way from China to Egypt. The presence of China's war leader is an indication that the dominant theme of the Cairo conference is the war in the Pacific. Plans are laid by Marshall with British commanders, shown in these motion pictures of the United Nations photographic pool. Commander for Southern Asia, Lord Louis Mountbatten, and American Commander in China, General Stilwell, with Chinese generals. The conference announces the fate of the Japs upon their defeat. Japan to be stripped of all conquests and reduced to the original Japanese islands. At the Russian embassy in Tehran, capital city of Iran, Soviet war leader Stalin arrives with British Prime Minister Churchill. And Stalin receives a ceremonial gift of honor presented by Churchill, a jewel sword which he kisses, a token from King George of Great Britain. The magnificent blade takes the eye of President Roosevelt as the conference pledges destruction of German war power and blows to be struck from east, west, and south, threefold operations implying a second front invasion of Europe from Britain.
So invasion plans were all set. But there were battles to be won. We had spotted some emplacements for huge German rockets, and our troops in Italy were at Monte Cassino. Meanwhile, at home, we had some problems, race riots in Detroit and Los Angeles. But as a nation, we had the momentum toward victory, prosperity, and freedom. And this is Lowell Thomas remembering 1943 and saying, so long until tomorrow.
The German Sixth Army, all that remains of the formidable force that, flushed with victory, stormed its way to Stalingrad. Now a horde of prisoners trudging along, stumbling along, in the Russian cold, hardly able to drag their ragged feet. Instead of capturing Stalingrad, they wind their way an interminable line of captives through Stalingrad streets. Their defeat was the critical factor in the moves of war that turned the Nazi bid for decisive victory in southern Russia into a staggering disaster. Grim scenes along the line of German retreat.